Hello, everyone, and welcome to the V2B Global Partnership webinar series. My name is Pradeep Nayak, and I'm based at University of Waterloo in the Faculty of Environment here. And I'm also representing here the Vulnerability to Viability Global Partnership on strengthening small-scale fisheries around the globe. Thank you for joining us here today. I'm going to do a series of introductions. I will first introduce the V2B partnership, and then I'll introduce the thematic series, and then I will introduce our speaker today, after which we will listen to the talk that is planned for today. So the Vulnerability to Viability Global Partnership is a transdisciplinary research, knowledge, and action network with over 100 members from Asia, Africa, and Canada, and as well as internationally. The goal of the partnership is to support small-scale fisheries in their transition from vulnerability to viability. And the way we understand vulnerability and viability is not just in the sense of economics or income, but also to include all aspects of human life, the political, the cultural, the environmental, ecological influences on small-scale fisheries and how that contributes to vulnerability and therefore viability. Our focus is fourfold. We aim to co-create and co-produce knowledge that can lead to the transition in from vulnerability to viability in small-scale fisheries. We aim to also create a repository of the knowledge through building an information system that can be used across all levels, right from the community to the academia to the government and all other levels. We also aim to develop transdisciplinary capacity across all these levels. Again, the capacity that is required to respond to vulnerability and therefore transition to viability, and also synthesize and integrate the knowledge that is collected or co-created in a way that it informs governance and policy from local to the global. The V2B Global Partnership aims to identify the diverse factors and conditions contributing to the vulnerability of small-scale fisheries and engage collaboratively with small-scale fisher communities and other key NGO, government, and university partners to enhance small-scale fisheries viability. We are conducting transdisciplinary community-engaged research in 6 countries of Asia, which includes Bangladesh, India, Indonesia, Japan, Malaysia, and Thailand, and 6 countries in Africa, which includes Ghana, Malawi, Nigeria, Senegal, South Africa, and Tanzania. In doing so, the V2B Global Partnership brings people and organizations together across physical, cultural, and disciplinary boundaries through a shared interest in addressing global change impacts on small-scale fisheries. The V2B thematic webinar series, for which we have gathered here today, is an initiative of the V2B Global Partnership to facilitate and generate high-level discussions on vulnerability and viability themes and topics within the context of small-scale fisheries. The goal is to feature academics, policy practitioners, and members of the civil society who have made significant contributions to the theoretical, practical, and policy aspects of small-scale fisheries, both locally and globally. V2B thematic webinar series takes place on the last Friday of every month, and it will be so throughout 2021. The series is available internationally through live streaming on YouTube, details regarding which can be found at www.v2bglobalpartnership.org. Today's webinar is the second in the series of V2B thematic webinars planned in 2022 and 14th since January 2021 when we first started. And it is my pleasure and my privilege to introduce Dr. Edward Ellison as our distinguished speaker of today's talk. Dr. Allison is the Executive Director, Science and Research of WorldFish, based out of Penang in Malaysia, but Eddie is joining us today from the West Coast, so it is very early in the morning, and thanks to Eddie for making the time so early in the morning for us. Dr. Allison is an interdisciplinary scholar with over 30 years of academic and policy experience, who works closely with researchers across social and natural sciences and the humanities, as well as with the stewards of natural resources in communities, civil society organizations, development actors, governments, and private sector. Dr. Allison's influential livelihoods and food systems work spans the globe thanks to his research, teaching, policy, experiences in fisheries and aquaculture, with links to sustainable development in sub-Saharan Africa, Asia, Oceania, Latin America, North America, and Europe, especially the globe. In both 2020 and 2021, he was listed by Clarivate Web of Science in the top 0.1% most cited of the world's researchers in the cross-disciplinary category. And congratulations, Eddie, on that big achievement. Dr. Allison currently advises the high-level panel for a sustainable ocean economy, a global initiative headed by 14 world leaders on a mission to transform the way in which we can protect and use the ocean. He is also a science advisor to the nonprofit Oceana and has honorary and visiting professorships at Lancaster University in UK and Washington School of Marine and Environment Affairs, Seattle, in the US. Under Eddie's leadership, WorldFish is also a partner and member of the V2B Global Partnership, and we are very proud of that. It is my honor to invite Dr. Edward H. Ellison to deliver today's talk to the V2B thematic webinar series, and his talk is titled as Addressing the Systemic Causes of Small-Scale Fish Actors' Vulnerability in Aquatic Food Systems, the CGIAR Resilient Aquatic Food Systems Initiative. Over to you, Dr. Allison.
Thank you very much, Prateep, for the generous introduction. And I should say first, a thank you also for welcoming us to the Vulnerability to Viability Partnership. It's one of several partnerships with Canadian organizations that we have had over the years, and three sort of ongoing research networks and projects that we really value are the Vulnerability to Viability Network, the Dried Fish Matters Research Project, and the Too Big to Ignore network of scholars and practitioners, all engaged in important issues relating to supporting the livelihoods and life worlds of small-scale fisherfolk throughout the world, but with a great emphasis on the global south as well, which is where WorldFish's work is focused. The talk that I want to give today is based on a new research program, and I may have to give you a little bit of context for those of you not familiar with the consultative group on international agricultural research, of which WorldFish is a member. But the CGIAR, that's our slightly unwieldy acronym, is a system of international public goods focused agriculture and food system research organizations, covering all aspects of the food system, but traditionally divided among different commodities and agroecosystems. But in the last couple of years, we've been coming together as one CGIAR, the organizations grouping together to conduct their research and policy advisory work, innovation and scaling of technologies and new technologies and institutional innovations in a more cohesive way across all parts of the food system. Within that reform, we at WorldFish have been leading a new research initiative, or a proposal up to this date, for an initiative that will start in April of 2022. And the initiative is called Resilient Aquatic Food Systems for Healthy People and Planet. And the basis for the design of this is really what I want to talk about today, and also to introduce you to the to the program and to outline and give some examples of the kinds of work it will do, and to invite your collaboration as well as your comments and suggestions and questions at the end of this seminar. Beyond that, your sort of collaboration and engagement. Many of you here today will be sort of partners, either as fellow scholars, researchers, potential funders, organizations that we work with, and so on. So this is really an introduction to what we're doing, and an invitation to keep engaging with us on this work. And so the basis for this research program is what we felt was a series of systemic causes of vulnerability among small-scale actors in the aquatic foods sector, fisheries, aquaculture, and in the food system, and what we felt could be done to assist in this project of moving from vulnerability to viability. Within the CG system, we're the only center that is focused on aquatic foods, and within the broader food system, we to some extent have to argue for why there should be a focused initiative on the aquatic part of the food system specifically. So some of these arguments will be familiar to those of you from within the aquatic food sector, but are ones that we feel are important to make when we're trying to bring the aquatic food sector into the wider food system and food policy discussion. And the fact that it isn't always in that discussion is one of our underlying causes of vulnerability in the sector. So some of these figures will be familiar to you, but aquatic foods are important as a source of micronutrient-rich foods. Traditionally, we've talked about them as protein-rich foods, but I think the work of my colleague Shakuntala Thilsted and others have really helped to refocus the attention on the importance of aquatic foods as sources of micronutrients for over a third of around a third of the population of the world. And other factors that we want to draw people's attention to are the importance of women in the aquatic foods sector, both in the primary and secondary sector, and for the aquatic foods as an essential source of micronutrients with lower carbon footprint and fewer biodiversity impacts than some of the land-based sources of such foods. And the livelihoods support for over 800 million people, that's the number of people actually employed, but also the people they support in small-scale fisheries and aquaculture and affiliated livelihood occupations, a significant proportion of the world's primary food producers. It's also a sector of great dynamism in the small-scale capture fisheries sector, innovation, new products, new markets, new ways of fishing, new ways of combining fishing with other livelihoods, but also aquaculture as this very fast-growing food production sector with a very strong growth trajectory, which responds to rising global demand for food, doubling really of per capita demand globally since the year 2000. And aquatic foods are also important because they're deeply interconnected with the rest of the food system. They're part of human and livestock diets. They're within supply chains for other food products, and they're a key component of water systems, which are governed for a whole range of other reasons. And more recently, part of blue economies that the attention to try to develop the maritime economy in sustainable and equitable ways, and aquatic foods are or should be a key part of those efforts. And indeed, this kind of recognition is beginning to percolate into wider food policy. And aquatic food systems were identified as one of 70 priority investments in agricultural research by an expert panel to the recent UN Food Systems Summit. But despite those contributions that aquatic food sector, among which the small-scale capture fisheries are an absolutely key part and one of the largest means of getting nutrient-rich food to nutritionally vulnerable people. There is still a number of challenges to the sustainability and the resilience of the sector. Resilience being something of a sort of opposite to vulnerability. And a lot of these challenges will be familiar to many people listening today. Over-harvesting of wild aquatic food stocks, so harvesting in unsustainable ways that perhaps damage the ecosystem that the productivity depends on, or simply, the pressure of demand, the natural productivity of the resources sometimes being unable to support that. A range of inequalities in supply chains, in aquaculture productivity growth, the vulnerabilities to climate change that have become so prominent in the last decades, the competition and for water, space and resources in the blue economy and in water resource governance and management in inland waters. We have challenges from aquatic animal diseases, antimicrobial resistance, supply chain disruptions, most recently from COVID-19, but also more generally from natural hazards, political economy instabilities. And all of these challenges exacerbate existing vulnerabilities, including those inequalities and vulnerabilities arising from unequal gender relationships. So despite this range of problems, if I think about all the researchers, many of the people participating in the Vulnerability to Viability Network and others, a lot of these issues have been very well articulated and studied, and solutions to them recommended and developed. There are lots of innovations, both institutional, in policy, legal instruments. The voluntary guidelines for small-scale fisheries addresses a lot of these issues from a policy perspective and urges government to institute management to address many of these issues. And there are numerous new technologies out there. But and yet these challenges persist. And there's a clear reason for that, we think, and that is an order of magnitude underinvestment in aquatic food systems research and development. And I haven't included today the evidence to support that underinvestment, but we've been with colleagues documenting and writing and pointing that out for the last 2 or 3 years now. Paper by Abby Bennett on looking at aid flows to different sectors and looking at what flows to the aquatic food sector compared to the rest of the food system, and work with Anna Farmery, Michelle Voyer, and others on looking at the flow of funds to ocean and blue economy sectors, and how much of that is committed to the aquatic food sector in comparison. And it's clear that there is this sort of underinvestment, not only in research and development, but in terms of scaling out innovations, investing in communities and producers and traders in the sector. So the results of those underinvestments, we feel, pose 5 systemic challenges to addressing the sort of challenges to the sector that we've identified in the other panel on this slide. And those 5 challenges we feel are, first of all, a lack of data to inform policy and investment decision making. There's no shortage of studies and information on fisheries, but it's not necessarily collating and distributing the data in ways that are useful for decision makers and decision making. And a lot of work, notably recently, the Illuminating Hidden Harvest project, which many people here have been involved in, have attempted to improve this situation. But we feel that there's a continuing lack of investment in the right data systems and in data that responds to the needs of fisherfolk in real time and at scales that are relevant to decision making. And so one of the elements that we address in our initiative is this lack of data. Second one, familiar again to many people here, is that of power asymmetries, which marginalize aquatic food sector actors, particularly women, particularly small-scale actors, in the current push for food system transformation and also in water resource governance and the blue economy. So small-scale food producers in these wider contexts, aquatic food producers, are can be marginalized and not included in the key decision fora and the key decision processes. Aquatic foods and associated livelihoods often overlooked in large-scale water resource management planning. So dams, irrigation schemes, flood control plans, water abstraction and extraction projects and programs often treat water as the key resource and forget that there's food living in it and people making a living from that food and nourishing themselves from that food. So real efforts to incorporate a greater awareness of the contributions that aquatic foods make to the value of water resources and the necessity of managing water in ways that enable access to aquatic foods supported by those water systems. An underinvestment in genetic improvement for farmed fish, which limits the productivity, profitability, and resource use efficiency gains that could help meet consumer demands for nutritious, healthy, low-cost food. Now, there's been quite a bit of investment in genetic improvement for fish, but it tends to be initially in the higher value species that are, have importance in markets in urban areas in the global north, salmon and oysters and other seafood like that. Whereas those are not necessarily the fish that are accessible to low-income consumers and nutritionally vulnerable consumers. So an area that we address also in our initiative. And a key one is that the innovations and potential solutions to the challenges that we mentioned earlier remain unscaled. So there are lots of great ideas, great technologies out there that have been piloted, that have been tested among small groups, but they're not getting scaled because many of the national innovation systems, agri-food innovation systems, don't extend to include aquatic foods. And so again, our initiative aims to ensure that aquatic food innovations are included in the national agricultural innovation systems to a greater degree than they have been up to now. So we've designed an initiative, as it's called, This is a 3-year program, but it's intended to be the first of 3 phases. So it will extend to at least to 2030 and beyond. And it's comprises 5 work packages. It's conducted in partnership with a range of institutions, and this initiative was built very quickly. We got the go-ahead to do this in, I think it was March 2021, and the proposal had to be fully written by November 2021. So there was a flurry of proposal writing last year, and we recognize that there are shortfalls in the range of consultations that we had. We worked with existing partners as much as possible, but through the inception phase of this, we'll be reaching out further, and really this is one of the early parts of reaching out for suggestions for partnerships and for building this aquatic food systems initiative, which is it's a contributor to the larger World Fish Resilient Aquatic Food Systems Program, which is articulated in our institutional strategy and is supported by engagement in not just this initiative, but actually 13 others across the CG system, as well as all our sort of bilaterally supported projects, partnerships, and engagements. But this really is a sort of foundation of our overall program. And the 5 work packages relate to the collation of data and analytical tools. They respond to these 5 systemic challenges. The need we feel for cross-system partnerships to support aquatic food system actors' inclusion in food system transformations and ocean economy. I think a lot of the partnerships that have arisen in small-scale fisheries and aquaculture in recent decades have been very effective at building solidarity within the fisheries sector across countries with small-scale fisherfolk in different nations, and really bringing them together to as a block influence particularly fisheries development and fisheries policy in countries and across the world. Where it's perhaps been less influential to date is in influencing the wider food system and ocean economy discussions. And that's really what this work package aims to do, is to build on these strong within sector partnerships and try to strengthen them across sectors, so that aquatic foods are better recognized in food systems and in the wider socio economy in general. At a planning level, work package 3 aims to do the same, but it's focused particularly on large-scale water infrastructure projects to ensure that aquatic food producers' interests, particularly users of the aquatic commons, often overlooked in these programs, are fully included in the planning process, and their interests are heard and defended and met and invested in as part of those plans. Our 4th work package relates to the need to bring the benefits of the tremendous innovation in genetic tools for supporting breeding. This is not genetic engineering, it's genetic improvement, so conventional breeding, but speeded by an improved knowledge of how to select for desirable traits in fish varieties. And these traits are not just for faster growth or more efficient food conversion, but also for greater climate resilience and so on. And finally, our 5th work package is intending to create hubs or innovation centers that can work within the wider agricultural innovation system to evaluate, scale, and accelerate the uptake of new innovations within the aquatic foods sector. And cross-cutting all of these work packages, we have an approach to gender that inclusion that aims to reach benefit and empower women, but also to transform gender relations where they are unequal and result in the exclusion or disadvantage of women within the aquatic foods sector. So gender inclusion is a key part of all 5 of these work packages. And these are obviously synergistic, they inform each other. So just some examples of the kinds of innovations under each work package. And for the rest of the talk, I'll go into a bit more depth on a couple of these, just to give you a sense of what the work looks like. Work package 1, Aqua Data, we're in discussion now about developing an aquatic food system sustainability index. So to try to think about, what makes for a resilient, sustainable aquatic food system, and how are we doing on attempts by the various agencies involved to really support that and to ensure that we're trending in the right direction in terms of equity, environmental sustainability, contributions to health and livelihoods. So we don't feel that that's necessarily captured in existing statistical systems. Fishery management systems tend to monitor, a single target reference point, or sometimes 1 or 2 target reference points. They look at the health of the fish stock, or the economic benefits from the fishery, and don't consider this sort of wider food system benefit and sustainability and equity dimensions. So that's really the idea of that too. With more information on how the aquatic food system is doing, we feel that then the investments to ensure that it's sustainable and equitable will be better directed. Work package 2 is really this attempt to extend our partnerships beyond the aquatic food sector to help ensure that aquatic food sector actors, particularly small-scale actors, are not excluded from these larger scale processes such as food system transformations. And here we also have an aspiration to change the way that we work. Typically our sort of constituents are the people that we work with and ultimately for are small-scale producers and consumers, traders, nutritionally vulnerable people, but we work with them through donors, governments, NGOs, funding agencies, and so on. And so we tend to tailor our research products to those audiences in order to negotiate with and on behalf of small-scale fisherfolk, whereas what we increasingly see a need to do is to provide our research in service of small-scale fisherfolk who are fighting their own battles, who are articulating their own needs. So we want to try and reorientate a lot of our research towards supporting the needs of small-scale fisherfolk and people in the supply chain. So that we respond more directly to their needs and persuade our donors and partners that that is something that other actors in the system, other research actors in the system could also be doing. And I know that the transdisciplinary way of working in the V2V partnership is very much in that space already. Work package 3 on aqua plans, and I've put an example in that is of evolving partnerships with indigenous peoples, organizations seeking to decolonize the Pacific food system, and ways of working using both scientific knowledge, local knowledge, and based around grassroots social networks and their needs and ways of working. So work package 3, aqua plans, we there intend to work in the co-design implementation of aquatic food production in small dams with smallholder farmers, landless people, public and private sector partners in the operation of those systems. In aquagenetics, using genomic and quantitative genetic techniques and digital approaches to phenotyping to ensure that we can more rapidly include resilience traits, such as feed and oxygen efficiency, disease resistance, into existing improved growth in one of the key aquaculture species in the global south, tilapia. And in our Aqua Labs, which are envisaged as multi-actor, gender and youth inclusive platforms for scaling uptake of the kinds of innovations that WorldFish and partners and other organizations have been developing, and indeed farmers, fisherfolk, traders themselves have been developing to try to upscale these innovations, including things like insect-based aquaculture feeds, seaweed cultivation, locally produced fish-based infant and child nutrition supplements, for example. So just to go into a little more depth on a couple of those. First of all, the partnerships, and I think this is one that's particularly perhaps of interest to this this audience. And I'm going to give a couple of examples from our past work that will be built upon in this new initiative, and those partnerships with actors outside the fisheries sector, such as women's self-help groups that are not specific to, fisheries or aquaculture in India, particularly in the state of Odisha, and in the Solomon Islands. And those partnerships also reach out beyond fisheries departments to include ministries of health and education and local government with responsibilities, much broader than the fisheries sector. So, putting this idea of Aqua Plus partners, so not just aquatic partners, but other sector partners to help achieve the overall aims to produce resilient aquatic food systems. So here, for this, I'm going to draw on some of the work of my colleague Shakuntala, who will be is our global lead for nutrition and public health, and will be familiar to many of you, I'm sure. And Shakuntala always talks about aquatic foods on the plate, the case for integration of aquatic foods with wider dietary guidelines and considerations. And she points to the multiple benefits of aquatic foods, that not only are the nutrients in aquatic foods highly bioavailable, but they help to enhance the micronutrient bioavailability from other foods, particularly plant source foods, when they're consumed together. So synergistic effects of including aquatic foods in the wider diet. And there's a whole strand of research that needs to be done there on what those synergistic effects are, and looking at traditional diets and understanding how they've come to in many ways optimize some of these synergies, and the importance of sort of working on the whole diet. Some of the innovations that have come from the partnerships that Shakuntala has built with women's self-help groups, with chefs, with food producing companies in the private sector, and with public sector nutrition agencies, include nutritious and safe aquatic food-based products designed to fit people's needs. Accessible in small quantities, long shelf life, easy to transport, and able to extend the consumption period in environments where aquatic foods may be available highly seasonally only. And in order to scale these and make sure they're included in wider nutrition programs, new partnerships have been built outside of the immediate sort of natural resource management, fishery management kind of policy environment. So inclusion into national food-based dietary guidelines, inclusion in social safety nets, school feeding programs, mother and child nutrition programs, public procurement programs, and state, in this case, the Odisha state strategy for accelerating nutrition gains in the state, with malnutrition being one of the priority issues facing the state of Odisha and hindering its human and social and economic development. So an example of a broad range of partnerships to ensure that aquatic foods help to nourish Odisha. And some of the successes have included fish now being included in the meals of children in 50 childcare centres, hot cooked meals provided to children, including fish products, rations for pregnant and nursing women, and then these plans for scaling that we also pick up, not just here, but in other geographies that we work through our attempts to include aquatic foods in wider food and agriculture innovation systems. Similarly, in Solomon Islands, partnerships building on women's organizations, the identification a long time ago of really the importance of building an enabling environment for changing women's economic empowerment opportunities, and including identifying autonomous women's organizations. We saw this in Odisha successfully. We see it in the Solomon Islands. We see it everywhere, supporting existing social organizations and looking at how they can work to include aquatic foods in the other things that they do. And in the particular case of the Solomon Islands, the church is a particularly important institution, and not one normally incorporated in sort of fishery governance or fishery development programs, but an example of reaching the kinds of partnerships that can help support the aquatic foods sector in wider society. And these kinds of partnerships have helped to shape the nature of development in the aquatic food sector in the Solomon Islands. In the island of Malaita, and where two alternative development models were under consideration. The first one, a traditional fishery development approach of building fishery centres. So building 14 fishery centres in Malaita would cost about $3.5 million. But the fishery centres supply infrastructure to help fish trade, to essentially supply freezer facilities for people at major landing stations, that allow then the distribution of fish and the conservation of fish quality, so that it can get to markets. But as an alternative, World Fish and Partners have been looking at supplying solar freezers to 200 communities, and each one of the freezer and solar panel units costs around $4,000. So the cost there is lower, and you have this much broader and more local reach. And these kind of models evolved through discussions with women's self-help groups and other actors in the system beyond fishery departments. And an example of the solar panel that is used there by women's groups to power freezers. And really this enables enhancement of fish-based livelihoods. And the sort of project process here was supporting these women's groups through diagnostic process, asking them what their issues were and what their potential solutions were, and matching that with what we knew about what technologies were available, and helping to provide the resources to get those moving. And so this was really testing this freezing, selling of frozen fish into other markets as a income generating activity focused on women, and was integrated with the provincial government's development planning. So another example of the new kinds of partnerships with the technologists developing the solar panel technology, the women's groups, and local government. Our next work package on genetics, I just want to sort of give you an overview of this. It's a little bit outside of what people working in small-scale fisheries would normally look at, but is consistent with WorldFish's move to a wider food systems approach, where we consider the whole of the food system, and our constituents also include low-income and nutritionally vulnerable consumers, not all of whom will have access to wild-caught fish. And so closing fish gaps is not going to happen without the contribution of aquaculture. So part of WorldFish's remit is really to think, well, how can we do that? Close those fish gaps in equitable ways, and in ways that include a diversity of actors that support small and medium enterprise in both the production and the trading sectors. So a lot of the work that the aquagenetics program is done in participatory ways, participatory fish breeding, looking at the traits that are important to small-scale farmers, to consumers, to traders, and including that in the consideration of what to breed for. And this really comes from the diagnosis of from FAO that aquatic genetic resources are underdeveloped and underinvested in, and the adoption of proven genetic improvement programs has been slow. And selective breeding is really one of the key ways to meet future demand for fish. And so it justifies a focus on the core technology of developing these well-managed long-term selection programs of the type that WorldFish has been working on for some time now. And with new technologies, we have the opportunity to really accelerate this development. And we build on decades of work. There are now 17 generations of the gift genetically improved fish tilapia, Nile tilapia, housed in our headquarters in Malaysia. We've also bred 3 generations of carp, 2 generations of silver carp. African catfish is being scoped. And the kinds of things that are being bred for are feed efficiency, disease resistance, oxygen resilience, and phenotyping, getting the fish to appear a certain way that appeals to consumers, and a whole bunch of innovations around genomic selection to speed the selection of desirable traits. And we're talking here in these species of 28% of world aquaculture production. And the idea here is really to move our strains through this pathway from development of new improved strains to greater productivity, efficiency, and profitability of farming systems, including small-scale farms, and more resilient, resulting in a more sustainable, resilient, and nutritious overall food supply. And our sort of timeline within the project and program is outlined here. And finally, our Aqua Labs. These are multi-actor, gender and youth-inclusive platforms for scaling uptake of innovations. And I'm just going to give you a couple of examples of the types of innovations that we might use these platforms to try to scale. One is innovations in processing. A low-cost solar fish dryer, which in monsoonal climates where dried fish are important in a climate that's increasingly unpredictable because of climatic variability and change, a means to reduce the spoilage in the drying process, speed and make more efficient the drying process, more reliable the returns to the processors and traders that are purchasing the fish to dry and distribute. These low-cost dryers are a potential solution. Now, they've been developed, they've been piloted. There's at least 1,500 women in coastal Odisha, I think this is, that are using this to generate additional income from their business ventures. But how do we scale this? How do we get this to more and more people, to the hundreds of thousands of women involved in drying small fish around the world? And that's really, how do we build a system that allows innovations like this to be scaled more rapidly without needing a project-by-project intervention, that provides the expertise, the capital, the knowledge, the opportunity for more and more small-scale entrepreneurs to take up these kinds of innovations. And that's really what we're trying to create with these innovation systems. And similarly, fish farming systems that incorporate small indigenous fish species of highly nutritious within farm ponds that are essentially producing fish for sale, to improve the nutrition value, both of the populations that are doing the fish farming, the rural populations involved in aquaculture, but also the consumer populations that they serve. So there's been tremendous success with incorporating small indigenous fish in fish ponds in Bangladesh and India, enhancing nutrition, enhancing income, enhancing productivity of the ponds, and trying to sort of scale this. There are existing scaling mechanisms in networks of innovation and extension services, but in many cases, those kinds of processes are missing for aquatic foods. And so trying to ensure that aquatic food users have access to those kinds of services is again an objective of this kind of work. And a final example, this one from Zambia, from work led by my colleague Rodrigo Yosa, and this is part of this larger effort globally to replace fish meal in aquaculture with other alternative food systems, out of two concerns really. One, a concern for the sustainability of some of the fish stocks, wild fish stocks that are used to produce feed, and also the competition between the aquaculture and animal nutrition sector and the need for small nutritious fish for direct human consumption. So, where those markets are in competition, often low-income consumers are losing out to agribusiness. And so if we can engage with agribusiness, the agri-feeds business and sort of commercial aquaculture to consider replacement feeds, and these replacement feeds are also cheaper and more available to small-scale farmers, then we've made significant gains in that sector, and also benefited small-scale fisherfolk, traders, and consumers of the fish that they supply. So this exemplifies in many ways the kinds of process and that we work through increasingly, and the kinds of people that might be involved in these innovation hubs. So we work with companies that innovate in the single-cell protein diet sector, with companies currently supplying commercial fish feed to the commercial farming sector, both large and small scale, in Zambia and elsewhere, with a university or other research partner, and with a national research partner as well, the Natural Resources Development College in Zambia, to undertake the trials. So these kinds of partnerships, and a commercial aquaculture company who supplies the trial sites and the fish. And, you know, successful trials of alternative feeds. And, you know, we're now looking into the sort of nutrition implications of this kind of work. So those are examples of the kinds of innovations that are already coming through the pipeline that we will attempt to scale through these innovation platforms. And the research component is really learning about how to do that, how it works, what's effective, how to do it in better and more inclusive ways. And ultimately to use these as systems to develop the autonomous ideas of fisherfolk themselves, who are full of innovative ideas, but often don't have the capital or the access to the networks of knowledge and availability of the appropriate supplies and equipment that they need to put their ideas into viable practice, and may not have the investors behind them to enable them to do so. So the idea is to create systems where we move much more to autonomous innovation and less reliance on external actors over time. We're going to be working across Asia, Africa, and the Pacific. We have specific countries, geographies where we'll work, and this work will be phased in. Where we start initially will be determined by our existing capacity in certain countries, and an evaluation of what the needs are in each country. And we'll gradually build out so that we have the complete 5 work packages in each of the countries that we work, as far as possible, within the constraints of the funding that we have. This is how we'll progress between 2022 and 2031 with implementing these different work packages across the globe. The kind of outcomes that we're hoping for, that scaling partners and stakeholders in 11 countries will use the improved knowledge systems and data to inform a number of investments that support aquatic food system transformation to greater equity, sustainability, provider of healthy foods. That we're going to see improved management and co-production of sustainable development pathways help to secure the rights and the livelihood benefits for at least 100,000 small-scale actors, and bring more nutritious diets to another 700,000. That we've set up aquatic food system labs in 3 countries to increase national innovation systems' ability to identify, evaluate, and scale those kinds of innovations that we were talking about before. To bring in gender transformative strategies to enhance integrated food, livelihood, and water use outcomes in the kind of multifunctional land and waterscapes, such as rice fish systems, irrigation systems, and so on, in 4 countries, Myanmar, Cambodia, Ghana, Zambia, and uptake, increased productivity and environmental performance in 3 countries of our genetically improved tilapia. So some examples of the kinds of outcomes that we hope for at the end of the project or the program. And in terms of broader impact, we have ambitions. The CG has 5 impact areas: nutrition, health, food security, poverty reduction, livelihoods and jobs, gender equality, youth and social inclusion, climate adaptation and mitigation, and environmental health and biodiversity. And this work is based on projected benefits work, and it assumes that we are part of a wider system of partners who are thinking and working towards similar goals. And so these forecast impacts here seem ambitious, and we've been asked to defend them within the CG. But we feel that we're not alone in doing this, that the programs that we do are compatible with a lot of the thinking that is coming out of the research community, out of the innovations that small-scale farmers and traders and fisherfolk are producing and championing themselves, and that if we work in appropriate partnerships, that these kinds of scales of beneficial impact from aquatic foods are achievable. And your participation and partnership will be a key part in achieving that. So it starts with your questions, your suggestions and critiques for the next few minutes. And I hope it will extend into potential partnerships with some of you in projects which are built around this platform. Those of you who are researchers in joint publications, in participation in networks, and also tangibly, you can participate by joining us. We're recruiting at all levels, from some key science leadership positions to kind of postdoc researchers within the sort of research element of this program. And you can get more information from our website or contact me for more information. Thanks very much for your attention, and looking forward to hearing your comments and questions.
Thank you very much, Eddie. Really interesting initiative and lots of prospects for not only small-scale fisheries, but the fisheries sector in itself. Your reference stories made me nostalgic, because I originally come from Orissa, and I know some of these World Fish initiatives that are ongoing on the ground right in Orissa. We have roughly 15 minutes for questions and discussions. We are receiving these questions on the YouTube chat. There is a number of messages, not exactly questions, so which I will quickly read some of them first, and if you want to react to them, then there are some questions that I would read for you from the YouTube audience. So the first one is Toymax. I don't know the full name here. Good new insights from projects like Hidden Harvest too, from Duke University, of course, but this is only focusing on fisheries, and there is a need for doing similar kind of work for aquaculture as well. Aquatic food system sustainability index is one important layer that needs to be put in the local context for understanding contributions to the SDG. The second message here is from Hannah. Wonderful to focus the research on the needs and rights of the SSF to respond to their needs, so the research becomes valuable to those who most in need. Proud of the work Swed Bio supported undertaken by World Fish in Solomon Islands, thanks to Hampus Eriksson et al. So if you want to react to that, quickly, and then I'll read out the other.
Yes, thank you for those comments. And yes, one thing I should acknowledge is that this work is supported by a whole range of people and donors and partners, and thanks to them. We're only able to work thanks to their the trust that they put in us, the investments that they make in us, and the people that we work with and through. And no time to acknowledge all of them, but if you go to our website, all of our projects sort of attribute who supports the different parts of our work. In terms of the Illuminating Hidden Harvest project, focusing only on capture fisheries, that's true. But the initiative, the data systems and the initiatives that that we focus on at WorldFish include both fisheries and aquaculture. And yes, it would be great to have an initiative of the kind that the Illuminating Hidden Harvest project did on the aquaculture sector as well. Some of the statistics are available because there's more on farming generally than there is on wild capture, non-farm natural resource use in terms of data availability and inclusion in existing data sets. But a lot of that has not been synthesized in the same way. So absolutely, good suggestion.
There is a question from Aliou Shal from Senegal. What prospects in fish farming for the large majority of fishing communities who we are working with, having no access to inland waters? And he has a related question on solar power and processing. Do the samples of solar tents source adapted to the processing sector in many West African, given the quantity of pelagic processed during season?
Yeah. I won't be able to answer the solar dryer adaptation to West Africa question, so I'll have to take that to my more specialized colleagues who work on that. The question about the extent to which the work on aquaculture could bring benefits to the marine small-scale fisherfolk. That's a really good question. I think in the past, WorldFish has become quite focused on inland fish culture. I think aquaculture in inland waters is in many ways has been, with some exceptions, shellfish culture, bivalve shellfish culture, etc., possible with lower technology inputs and lower capital inputs in inland waters, and better integration with existing agricultural sort of markets and so on. Mariculture has been less prominent, with the exception now of seaweed farming and bivalve aquaculture. So those two areas are, have grown considerably and have more potential. And WorldFish hasn't been working very actively in those areas in recent years, but we're certainly looking closely at the seaweed space and thinking about mariculture more in our planning. So yeah, that is an area that I think we'll see grow in our portfolio, but also I see growth possibilities there. I know that there's quite a bit of work going on in East and Southern Africa on marine aquaculture, and certainly throughout Asia. And yeah, I think that we should look at which of those technologies have possibilities in West Africa. That's a key gap. So thank you, Aliou, for those questions and suggestions.
And Aliou has also a suggestion with regard to the list of challenges that you mentioned, Eddie. He says the use of small pelagic as food base in West Africa as compared to the fish meal destined for other parts of the world.
Yes, yeah, that's an absolutely key one. And yes, many of you will know that there's a dialogue on a project that WorldFish and FAO and others were involved in on looking at the use of small pelagics for animal source foods and human foods in sub-Saharan Africa. There was a review done recently, and there's a meeting to look at follow-ups, and I'm sure that Aliou will be among the participants there, and certainly several of my colleagues from WorldFish will be involved. So that's a great forum to take some of those suggestions forward.
Another comment from Toymax. Improvement of nutrition quality through post-harvest technologies, including low-cost solar dryers, been around for a very long time. Seems like these efforts are reoccurring over and over again. Developing alternative feeds for aquaculture is equal to more small fish for direct human consumption. So that's a comment. But I think there is a kind of a question here also from Toymax, is that integrated rice fish, shellfish systems may perform worse out from a GHG greenhouse gas perspective, and there is a trade-off involved in that process.
Yes, I mean that's another question that I would defer to. We have a whole sort of group of people who work on rice fish systems who I think have looked at the performance of those systems in multiple dimensions. I think there are ways that rice fish systems can be managed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from those systems, but I think that is something that has to be looked at critically. It depends where you put the system's boundaries in terms of the performance of the system. I think having to move to a system where maybe you abandon wet rice production and go for dry rice saves on methane emissions from the wet rice system, but it may bring emissions increases from other parts of the system, including the nutrition loss that then has to be made up from getting that food from something other than the rice, the nutritious food from something other than that rice fish system. So you might just move the greenhouse gas impact to another part of the food system rather than completely eliminate it. And I think those kind of interlinkages at a landscape level and at a food system level need to be looked at, I think, before decisions are made on the basis of the study of kind of individual subsystems.
Thank you, Adi, for answering that. And the next question is from Ruel Mia. Is there any particular strategy you expect from your work between 2022 to 31 that can enable small-scale fishers, including women, to have better access to resources and markets as important actors?
Yeah, I think, the overall targeting of a lot of our work to ensure that it includes women is there throughout this, and really the whole of the strategy is kind of aimed in that direction. But specifically, I think pushing on an approach that within the CG World Fish pioneered, which is the sort of gender transformative approach, is to actually sort of critically examine existing gender relations and attempt to work to transform them towards improved equity of opportunity and outcome for women. So the explicit adoption of an approach to gender in small-scale fishery value chains that goes beyond kind of accommodating existing gender roles to working with women and men to transform those roles in productive ways towards providing the kinds of greater opportunities for women in the supply chains that I think it was Marie's question alluded to.
Thanks once again. So the next question is Anna Carolina. Building partnerships seems very important, especially to integrate local efforts to national and international guidance, such as the SSF guidelines. My question is, how are these partnerships built? Are there any partnerships built across communities? So multi-scale,
yeah.
I know.
Yeah, I think the partnerships are built really through often through existing relationships, and through having people on the ground. World Fish has offices in 11 countries, and we're trying to get as many of our science staff based in those countries. We have a model where we have a headquarters in Penang, Malaysia. We have a number of people sort of scattered in other institutions, but we also have the majority of our staff are based in country, and many of those in kind of field-based facilities. And it's really about the kinds of relationships that they build with local communities, with local government actors, with partnerships at all levels, really. And I think, there's sometimes more visible in the scientific arena and in the sort of policy arena are the global networks and partnerships, the transnational ones and so on. But these are built on a foundation of much more local partnerships, and the strategy really to just work with within existing social structures, within existing community organizations, and also with partners who build those organizations. We do work with a lot of both local and international social development NGOs, as well as kind of environmental organizations. And we just, through a whole range of mechanisms, but fundamentally being in the place and having relationships in the place, and ensuring that partners are included as much as possible in the dialogues and the work that we're involved in as well.
Thank you very much. But in the interest of time, I think, I will bring this to an end, and we have a lot more questions that are there. What we will do is we will provide all these questions to Eddie. We'll email you these questions. So this this goes into your ongoing, feedbacks that you are receiving as part of this new initiative. And of course, the email is there, so you can directly get in touch with Eddie with any additional questions. I think, this was a really, really wonderful talk, the aquatic food systems connection, especially from a very selfish, point of view, to vulnerability and viability transitions is immense. And the challenges that you showed in the prospects also in terms of partnership, in terms of scientific innovation, in terms of new policies and governance are just some areas that can, create ripple effects, in terms of how small scale fisheries can move from vulnerability to viability. So there is much to continue in terms of our discussion, and we'll be happy to kind of provide what we are finding in the 12 countries that we are working and doing in-depth community-based research. There's much to continue. So thank you very much, Eddie. We don't see this as an end, but we see this as a beginning of a whole lot of discussions and working together. But before we bring this to an end, and I'll request my colleague Cyril to bring up the poster for the next month's talk, so that everybody knows about it, and then we'll come to an end. So the next month, on the last Friday, that is 25th of March, we have a slightly different kind of talk from Dr. Sandhu Chetri, who is originally from Bhutan, was associated with the Gross Happiness Index work as one of the founding directors of the Happiness Center there, but currently in Indian Institute of Technology in Kharagpur, West Bengal, as a visiting professor. And Dr. Chetri is going to talk about happiness and mindfulness for transitioning from vulnerability to viability, and showing the directions linking with resilience, happiness, and mindfulness I know some of the talks that he has given at other places, and I know Dr. Chetri for a couple of years and been working with him through the IIT collaborators in India of the V2B. It's going to be very inspiring, and it's going to show really new and innovative directions in terms of how some of these transitions in small-scale fisheries can happen through addressing happiness and mindfulness and resilience. So we invite you to join us next month again on the last Friday, 25th of March, on the same platform. Thank you everyone for the wonderful questions and engaging in the discussions. And we look forward to seeing you in the next month's webinar again. Thanks once again, Eddie.
Thank you, Prateep, and thank you everyone for listening in.
Bye for now. Bye.
Bye.